Hello and welcome to And the Runner-Up Is. This week on the show, we're talking the 1960 Best Actress race at the Academy Awards, where Elizabeth Taylor won for her performance in Butterfield 8. But why did she beat fellow nominees Greer Garson, Deborah Kerr, Shirley MacLaine, and Melina Mercouri? We'll explore all this and more today on the season premiere of And the Runner-Up Is. Hello and welcome back to the season premiere of And the Runner-Up Is. I'm your host, Kevin Jacobson, here to talk about the 33rd year of Best Actress at the Oscars, which covered the films of 1960. We'll be discussing why Elizabeth Taylor won, why the losers lost, and who we think was the runner-up of this very fascinating Best Actress race. And my guest today has been on this show a number of times in the past, dating all the way back to the Best Picture series. Her work has included Citizen Dame, The Watch and Talk. She's a freelance film critic, film writer. Please welcome back to the show, Karen Peterson.
Hi, Kevin. How are you?
I am great. I don't know if I even informed you ahead of time that this is indeed the season premiere. We are entering the 60s, so.
Well, I didn't even think about that, but I'm excited to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And before we talk 1960, would really be interested to hear your thoughts on Best Actress, just as a general category. My first question for you, Karen, what is your favorite Best Actress win of all time?
My favorite, in terms of, because I love the movie, because I just love the winner, that is Cher for Moonstruck.
Wow. Excellent choice.
Thank you. It's such a fun win, and I love that one.
Mm-hmm. And that's a very fun race for many reasons as well. So very excited to get to that particular year. Great. Well, my other question for you is, what would you say is your most heartbreaking loss in Best Actress?
This one's tough because for me, there's a lot that I would have loved to have seen, someone else win. But for me, when I think about heartbreaking losses, I think which one was I personally invested in the run up to the race, which means it needs to be something that happened not just during my lifetime, but during the time that I've actually cared about the Oscars. And I think when I really look at it, probably the one that was most heartbreaking for me was really recent. It was in 2017 when Sally Hawkins lost to Frances McDormand.
Oh, wow. Interesting.
Yeah.
You want to go into that?
I love The Shape of Water so much. I think it's such a great performance. And Sally Hawkins is just incredible in that movie. Frances McDormand is great. And I love her. Obviously, we didn't know she was going to win again so soon for a third time almost immediately after. But just in terms of looking at the two films, the two performances, I think what Sally Hawkins did was so special, and especially where she was communicating so much emotion without even being able to speak. And I just think that is a performance for the ages, and I'm so sad that it wasn't recognized by the Academy.
Yeah, it's just one of those things that happen sometimes when a film can win Best Picture, and that should indicate a higher appreciation of the film. Obviously, you'd think that would rise all tides and help a performance like Sally Hawkins. I sort of felt the same way with Michael Keaton and Birdman. Like, how do you give that Best Picture but not him Best Actor?
Right, yeah.
That sort of thing.
Yeah.
But yes, she would have also gotten my vote that year. I love that performance. So expressive. Said so much, again, without actually speaking. That is one of those races where I think if voters had the benefit of hindsight, knowing that Nomadland was coming, they may have gone in a different direction. I don't know if it would have gone in Sally Hawkins' direction. Maybe Saoirse Ronan wins there. Who knows? But yeah, another really fun race that I'm excited to get to down the line, way down the line as well.
Yeah, you got a little while for that one.
Yes. All right. Well, let's go way back in time, 62 years as of this recording, to the 33rd Academy Awards. The nominees there were Greer Garson for Sunrise at Campobello, Deborah Kerr for The Sundowners, Shirley MacLaine for The Apartment, Melina Mercouri for Never on Sunday, and Elizabeth Taylor for Butterfield 8, with the winner being Elizabeth Taylor. So, Karen, before we talk about these individually, did you have any overall thoughts on this lineup?
It's an interesting race. I'd seen Butterfield 8 and The Apartment before. I had never seen the other three until I was preparing for this conversation. And it's really interesting to look at how, as we're going into 1960 and the world is very much changing, there's some reaction to women going to work in World War II, and then the men coming home. And as we go into the 1960s, you really see this struggle between men and women. And I think that is very evident here in the Best Actress race, the types of roles that are nominated in this category, and overall the types of films that women were getting to make. And there really is sort of this blending of worlds, I guess, where you have kind of this old style of filmmaking and this new style, these new types of stories being told. So it's really an interesting category, and I'm excited to dive into it.
Yeah, definitely. This was one of those really interesting lineups for me to watch, like, one after the other.
Yeah.
Because sometimes in Best Actress, it's like, actresses doing very different things in their films, and it becomes like an apples and oranges type of situation. We do have that a little bit here, obviously, but at the same time, I think it was just interesting to see how so many of these performances and just the roles have to just deal with like terrible men and sort of managing their way through like the patriarchy, or just like generally trying to find their way in this world that isn't built for them, and we'll probably talk about that more as we discuss the performances. But we have a lot of co-lead situations here. You can make a strong argument that none of them are really like the sole lead of their films, which I think is more of a change from other lineups we've talked about in the past. But yeah, even besides that, I'm just fascinated by how much this really is another field where we have people from the past, quote unquote, you could say, like Greer Garson, Deborah Kerr, and Elizabeth Taylor are sort of contemporaries, but pretty well established by now. Melina Mercouri is like this discovery, and Shirley MacLaine is just getting bigger and bigger as a star. So it's really like another really fun intersection of like past, present, and future here that I'm excited to delve into.
Yeah.
So let's just jump right into it. Going in alphabetical order here. We're starting off with Greer Garson for Sunrise at Campobello. So here we come to the final Greer Garson nomination. The last time we talked about her was way back in the 1945 episode with The Valley of Decision. So that's a 15-year break in between nominations, which I believe up to this point in Oscar history is a record, at least in Best Actress. That would be broken later on, but still, it's interesting to me that she does have that longevity. And listeners will also know that I'm not the biggest fan of Greer Garson, so I hadn't actually seen this film before this week. It's actually the only film here that we're going to talk about today that I haven't seen before, but just to catch people up on what she's been doing in between 1945 and 1960. She continued to make films with Walter Pidgeon all the way into the 50s, including a sequel to Mrs. Miniver. She was still a star like way into the 50s, not quite at the height of her very successful run in the 40s, obviously. I did read that she also replaced Rosalind Russell on Broadway, playing Auntie Mame. Would have been interested to see that interpretation. But speaking of Broadway, Sunrise at Campobello originated as a Broadway play, which I think, not to foretell my own thoughts on the film, you can tell that it's based on a play. I think that's fair to say. But it's about Franklin Delano Roosevelt and Eleanor Roosevelt, as Franklin is first diagnosed with polio and he has to adjust to life with paralysis in his legs. Also still trying to be a political leader at the same time. This is before he's president, and Greer Garson plays Eleanor as she tries to take care of him and also is coming into her own as a leader herself. So that's in a nutshell what the film is. Karen, I'm curious if you have any thoughts on Greer Garson, just in general as an actress, and what you think of her here in this final Oscar nomination.
Honestly, I don't have that many thoughts of her as an actress because I don't think that I've seen enough of her movies to really have a full picture of her. I definitely have thoughts about this movie, though.
Oh, yeah. Well, what do you think of this performance here, which is very big and showy, you could say?
Yeah, I think she got nominated for Most Actress.
Yeah.
That's, yeah. So when I try to convince people that watching movies that were made before 1980 is worth your time, and they don't like to do it, I think a lot of times they imagine that this is what all these movies are. It was the last one I watched because I'd been kind of putting it off, and
That's
it was
fair.
2.5 hours, I just went, okay, here we go, I'm doing this. And
you can be
trying
honest.
to be kind. I guess everyone's dead now. I don't have to be, but
that's true. Go for it.
But yeah, it does feel like a play. You're absolutely right there, but it also it feels old. Everything about it just feels old. The way that Eleanor and FDR talk to each other, the way that he defers to his mother, the way that the children talk to dad and everything. And I mean, obviously it's patriarchal structure and that's just the reality of it, but it just feels extremely old and dated. And then what Ralph Bellamy is doing as FDR, I was watching it and I was like, wait, is this what Burgess Meredith based the Penguin on for the Batman series? Because it really feels like it. And yeah, so I did not enjoy the movie. I thought that Greer was trying very hard.
She was trying.
I don't think that she went into it intending to like just do a ridiculous performance. I think she really was giving it her all, but I think that the way that it's written does her no favors. Are we going to talk about the teeth?
Yeah, we are. We definitely are. How can you not?
Yeah. I think that there's so much happening that just doesn't work at all. Yeah. So, yeah.
Yeah, unfortunately for me, my feelings on Greer Garson remain unchanged after this performance, which, you know, is one of the nominations from Greer that I hadn't seen before this. Like I said, I hadn't heard great things about it. Again, like you said, it's nearly 2.5 hours long. It's a biopic. None of these are ringing endorsements for me. And the film itself, I found very stodgy, it's just kind of interminable, to be honest, without much of a compelling arc to really sustain it. For me, I just never really escaped the feeling that I was just watching actors portraying these real-life figures rather than really becoming them. And that is true of Greer Garson's performance. The teeth, I do think, are a distraction and possibly even a hindrance to her ability to be real, you know? And so I think, you know, even the speech patterns are awkward at times. I get that that's somewhat how, you know, the real Eleanor Roosevelt would speak in public. I've watched some of her speeches, but the way that she is inhabiting her, it just doesn't really come naturally, I don't think. There's just kind of this artificial quality that is sort of pervading the whole performance, and it just feels like she's straining for a lot of it. And that's not the impression that I get from the real life Eleanor, from a lot of her just, you know, real life speeches. I know that in the context of the film, it's, you know, at the very beginning of her, you know, emerging as this political figure, so she's not fully at the peak of her power, you could say, but it all just sort of feels like dress up to me. It doesn't really feel like someone who even like grew up feeling awkward, which is what she says at one point in the film. Eleanor Roosevelt, I think, is just someone who did have a distinct characteristic to her, or just like a very distinct personality, I think. And I just don't know if she was the right fit for that at the end of the day. I did see my friend Baby Clyde, who I had on this show a few episodes ago. He was writing about this performance and said that, you know, this is a character role and there's just a kind of like an expressiveness that's required here that I don't know if she was always best at, Greer Garson. So what we get is like more of an impression rather than it actually ever feeling like she's inhabiting her.
I agree.
Just to go through the film a little bit and maybe try to find some highlights. I don't know if you would agree with this, but I do think that her subtler moments are probably the strong suit, how little there are in the film. But like towards the beginning, they watch the sunset, very longingly. And she just says it's like, it's a nice, quiet time. Like, I think there's that, and there's like this other scene where Franklin is diagnosed and she's clearly in distress, and she goes up the stairs and is lying down in the bedroom, and they just have this like very silent exchange where she's showing that she's concerned but that she's going to be there for him no matter what. I think those quieter moments work for me a lot better than all the speechifying.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think the reason is because that is where they're not trying to be showy. They're just having these pauses. And I think that if more of the movie had been about them and about their relationship and not just about, kind of showing off for the press and that kind of thing, which I know that's a totally different story, but I think it would have overall just been a much different experience. And I think that the performances would have had an opportunity to really shine through.
Right. Yeah. And she has like these, dueling moments with her mother-in-law, who is just like basically a cartoon villain, Sarah. And, this whole thing with Louis Howe being like a dear friend of Franklin's and like a very big help around the house. I feel like Greer does at least capture some of that willfulness of Eleanor Roosevelt, even though it's like her mother-in-law just hates this guy and is very strong-willed herself. She's able to match that, and she does have that commanding presence, just probably from being a leading lady for so long that she just commands that kind of respect. I think she doesn't feel like a wilting flower or whatever. It's she gets that part of it, I would argue, even if not right, the mannerisms and the voice and the appearance. Just like all the surface level stuff is just very distracting, unfortunately.
Yeah, definitely.
And there's also kind of this subplot, I don't know if you want to get into this too, where she's like struggling to get along with her daughter.
I struggled with that a lot just because I felt like it never really went anywhere.
Yeah.
This poor daughter, her whole complaint is that she's constantly getting shoved aside, and she spends the whole movie getting shoved aside.
Right. And that doesn't really resolve too much.
No,
she does
really
speak her mind at one point, but yeah, it just doesn't really go anywhere, like you said. So she does have a big moment where she breaks down while she's reading a bedtime story to the children. After is like Franklin is like having to crawl up the stairs by himself, but his mother-in-law is just like, or her mother-in-law is so horrified by it, and basically just how it looks, like being more concerned about appearances and such. And there's something about that exchange that hits a nerve for her. Any thoughts on her breakdown moment? Feels very showy, but for me, it doesn't quite land as intended.
Yeah, I think that's overall the problem with the film is that anytime it tries to have these big moments of like, that should have been a moment where we thought, this is awesome. She's doing a great job. She's really letting, really letting her feelings out.
Right.
Yeah, and instead it just falls flat because it's too much.
It's like this really awful blend because we do have these bigger moments and these smaller moments, and you think that they can sort of balance each other out, but I feel like it just goes so far in both directions that we don't really have a strong middle to sort of connect it all.
Yeah, because then even when you get, toward the end when she gives her big speech, and she's nervous about it. It's her first really big speech, and she's speaking to a bunch of women, and she has a joke prepared that she pretends is not prepared. And the scene calls for some humility and a little bit of nervousness, but Garson isn't able to really pull that off. She's too confident in who she is. And Maybe part of it is just knowing who Eleanor Roosevelt really became
Yeah.
after that. I don't know what all went into that, but it also doesn't work. It feels very much like, okay, and now we have arrived at this moment, and I am going to read these lines this way. It also didn't land the way I think it should have.
Yeah, I would agree with that, sadly. And I mean, just to speak to one other highlight, I would say is the point where we're like flashing forward a few years later. This is a little bit before the speech that you're talking about, where they're at Hyde Park, where he's like adapting to this new situation. And there's this exchange where the two of them have a conversation about how they first met and how like they are distant cousins and how the family opposed the marriage at first. And she says she was an awkward child. We see some of those insecurities there, or at least she's voicing those insecurities. I don't know how much we actually see it, but again, I appreciate the sort of warmth to the conversation that they found each other and their love could get them through this. Again, those quieter exchanges really are her highlight for me, even if does the film always earn it? Not necessarily, but I just appreciated when the film would sort of lay off having to impress us with these impressions, I guess.
Yeah, I agree.
I sadly don't have a lot else for this because I just feel like it's the same just like off-putting tone for a lot of the film, and this performance just sadly never quite landed for me. I can see why it would be impressive enough to obviously get this nomination. This feels like maybe just from doing this show, one of the first real true transformative types of performances, which we would obviously see bearing out a lot more in the modern day. So it is sort of like a early, like the blueprint for the showy public figure biopic type of performance in this category. So there's that. Unfortunately, it just wasn't a great example, a good starting point for that.
Well, everyone's got to start somewhere, right?
I suppose so. Yes. I did read, I would love to know your thoughts on this, that Greer Garson, apparently she wanted Marlon Brando to star as Franklin Delano Roosevelt, which he declined, because he had done a film called The Men in 1950, where he was also in a wheelchair, and he said that he thought that they would be laughed off the screen because he was too young for that, and she was too quote unquote Republican for such a Democrat as Eleanor Roosevelt.
It would have been a much different movie with Brando.
Yeah. I feel like it might be even hammier, but
yeah.
Although maybe that's more later Brando. I don't know if that would have been.
I don't know. I think it would have definitely been well, I don't know if it would have been more hammy than Ralph Bellamy.
That is true. A different slice of ham, you could say.
Yes. Yeah. Definitely. Generous casting for him.
Right.
Too,
yes, that's true. So, yeah, unfortunately, we're not going out on a high with Greer Garson, but kudos to her for having the longevity that she had to get this final nomination. This was her 7th and final nomination. So that's about all I have to say on Greer Garson. Anything else?
No, I think we've said it all.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's move on to Deborah Kerr for the Sundowners. Speaking of final nominations, it's actually wild how we have this sort of happening quite a bit when like multiple actresses who were beloved by the Academy are getting their final nominations in the same year. It did happen in 1948 with Irene Dunne and Barbara Stanwyck. It happened in 1958 with Susan Hayward and Rosalind Russell. And now here we are with Greer and Deborah. What makes this kind of even more fascinating is that just from reading multiple accounts, I mentioned this on Deborah Kerr's first nomination in that episode, is that, Deborah Kerr was a little bit considered to be like a replacement for Greer Garson in some respects, as like the refined British actress, often playing these noble women of a certain class, And now here, it's like their journeys are coming to the end at the same time. But for Deborah, this is sadly a situation where we don't get a culmination moment, because this is it for her with 6 nominations and 0 wins, which is painful, I think, because I love her as an actress. But here in the Sundowners, she's reuniting with Robert Mitchum, who she starred with in Heaven Knows Mr. Allison just a few years before. And they are playing a married couple in Australia, which does mean we get some great accent work from the both of them. And they're playing this nomadic couple who have a teenage son, and they are sheep herders who travel around from place to place, but haven't really found a place to settle down. And that's largely in part because the husband, Paddy, doesn't want to settle down, but his wife, Ida, played by Deborah Kerr, is wanting that sense of security. They do end up at a place where he's able to shear sheep and she is able to be like the community cook, and things are going very well for like maybe a down payment on a home, but it takes some convincing to get Paddy to commit to anything serious. And that's largely what the tension is in the film, which I would say on the whole is kind of like a nice slice of life type of film. So let's talk Deborah Kerr, Karen. Thoughts on the great Oscar bridesmaid Deborah Kerr and her final nomination here.
I really like Deborah Kerr. It is sad that she never won an Oscar. Thankfully, the Academy finally gave her an honorary statuette years later, because, you know, they needed to recognize her for her body of work and her contributions. But I think that, yeah, it is unfortunate that she never won. And when you look at the races, as you have, I don't know, it's always interesting to look at like why someone lost, and that there's always that sense, especially with actresses like her, that like, oh, we'll get to that at some point, and then it just never happened. But I think this is great work in the Sundowners. I actually really like this film a lot. I like how you described it as a slice of life movie, because that is definitely what it feels like. In some ways, looking at it 60 years later, there is a dated quality to it, but not in the same way as Sunrise at Campobello.
No, certainly not.
It's more of just like kind of a view of this bygone world or something, you know, where it's this time that and in the time period, it wasn't like it was, you know, taking place in the olden days or anything. It was, you know, fairly contemporary. But I think that what's interesting is just the relationship between Ida and Paddy, and their relationship that they have with their son. And I think that there are some really powerful moments that make this a really enjoyable film to watch, and also tender sometimes too. I think that Deborah Kerr, throughout the movie, I think she understands who her character is and really inhabits her, and just does such a great job of giving us this view of a woman who is going to stand by her man no matter what, even when it means putting her own dreams aside. That is what she signed up for, and that is what she's going to do. And I think that Kerr really sells it very well.
Yeah, I agree. And I'm just, like, I'm sad to be finally at the end of her Oscar nominations, just because, you know, I really liked her as an actress before doing this series, but just in doing this and watching so many of her performances this year, more or less, not obviously back to back, but just in very quick succession, I've really just come to respect her talent, her versatility, you know, even in roles that aren't as strong sometimes. She is very often doing something interesting and giving her characters a sense of dignity and respect, not unlike Greer Garson, but I think the difference is there's just more of a depth of feeling for me when I'm watching a Deborah Kerr performance that is very human and very soulful. And there's a lot of times a sense that there's stuff that's going on beneath the surface for her characters that are sort of going unsaid, but that she's still able to communicate that through the way that she looks at her scene partners or her line delivery. Like, that's certainly, I think, exemplified here in the Sundowners, where she is playing like a tougher character who isn't afraid to express what she wants. But it's not just that she's telling us what she wants, like she's actually showing it and living the character actively, as a woman who has this very loving relationship with her husband, but is also sometimes frustrated by how little interest he has in just staying put. Like, he's always on the move, and she just wants to slow down and be able to raise their son and have a home. And I think there's a feeling you get, at least for me watching it, is where you wouldn't necessarily call her like repressed, on the surface. Like, she's able to speak her mind, she's in this great relationship, but there is something lingering there where she is deferential to her husband, and she does get upset with him at certain points in the film, but then it always resolves to this sense of like forgiveness, right? But I do think you are still seeing a little bit of the frustration on her part, especially when like he's away from her, or like he's off drinking at the pub, or after they've had like an argument. But it's not overt. Like, she's still having to work within the rules of this little sort of society and what's expected of her, but it is there. And I think she just, like you're sort of saying, has a very clear understanding of who this character is. I almost want to compare it to what Frances McDormand is doing in Nomadland, which is a different kind of film, obviously, but still about like, nomads and sort of figuring out your place. I do think in both of those cases, there's an ease with how they're playing their characters, but also showing that there is a lot going on internally that, we might not be privy to necessarily, but is still just trying to make connections and just trying to find this place of comfort in a way and like feel whole again. But yeah, what I love is that she's not just like an archetype of like a suffering wife kind of character. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I think that really matters. I'm sure you want to break down a couple of key moments, but I think one that really struck me was the conversation she's having with her son, where he wants to put down roots, and Patty's like, we're going. And she's sort of in between, and she says, don't make me choose between you and your dad, because I'm going to choose your dad. And the thing is that I think that in some cases that would have felt like, oh, I'm stuck with him, I have to go with him. But for her, it really does feel like she's making that choice. She doesn't have to leave with him, but she will if it comes down to it. And I think that that's such a key moment. And I think it's such great work from Carr, because she really sells it as, this is my choice.
Right. Yeah. It surprised me just watching the film again, how much it felt like, for me, the film is mostly on her side. And that the Patty character is a little bit seen as just kind of like this listless figure who, if he were to just, get up the gumption to just be like, okay, I'm done with this way of life, I'm ready to just put down roots and, honor my wife's requests and my son's request, then that will resolve itself. So I think she's able to do that without making it into a sort of cheap, just like suffering wife type of character, like cliche. So I appreciate that. And I think she also is just surprisingly able to adapt to this character that you might not expect a Deborah Kerr to be able to just play like a working class person, just like going from town to town, not necessarily like the noble figures that she would play in the past. And also doing it with an Australian accent. I think it's a pretty good accent, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, I would be curious what Australians think of it,
That's
but
true.
I wasn't put off by it.
Yeah, I think the Robert Mitchum accent kind of comes in and out a little bit.
A little bit.
But for her, I think, she surprisingly is able to adapt herself well to that. And one thing I also really like is just the relationship between them, because it is surprisingly complex, I would say, for the time period, working within the studio system, to have it be so sort of even-handed. And like at the very beginning, even when they're in the tent and they're sort of like complimenting each other's bodies in a way, like saying like, oh, glad to know you appreciate me and all that stuff, and like, come over here and I'll appreciate you. Like they just have this very easy chemistry together, and it really just establishes why she wants to stick with him through thick and thin and is putting up with a lot of his bullshit. Is deep down that love will never die. So I love that they established that in the beginning really nicely. Another really interesting scene for her, I think, is when they come across like a train that's passing through, and she makes eye contact with this woman on the train who is like doing her makeup, and it's just this sort of silent exchange where she's seeing what her life maybe could be, or maybe was before, who knows, and she's kind of tearing up a little bit also in front of her husband after that. And it's just, I feel like they don't make too fine of a point with it. They don't over explain how it is that she's feeling. I think 9 times out of 10 she's just always going to choose this life with her husband. But I feel like seeing that woman on the train kind of like it rings a few bells in her mind, I guess you could say.
Yeah, because there's so many possibilities, and I love that they don't really bog you down with explanation. They just let it be, because it could be the life that she would have had if she had made a different choice, or it could be the life that she gave up to live the life that she has now, or there's different possibilities. But I think that it's such a it's a moment of kind of this introspection. I think that, at least for me watching it too, it also made me think of times that I've had that, where it's like, oh, if I had just done something differently, I would have been in a much different place. And I love when we get moments of that, like that in film.
Definitely. And I think it's also that she's not really even used to seeing like society women per se. Mm-hmm. Like she's in a very, very male dominated environment.
Yeah. And so she doesn't spend much time around women at all.
Right. But I also, to speak to that, what I do really like is the scenes where she does get to be with some of the other women in this community. Like after they get this job with like shearing sheep and she gets to be the cook, we're kind of seeing this culture of the environment where this local woman is pregnant and about to have her baby, and Ida takes care of her and has these very natural sort of caretaker instincts. Meanwhile, all the men are out at the pub, including the guy who's about to be the father. And it's sort of this compelling undercurrent, I think, to the film that, again, I'd forgotten about on this rewatch, because it has such a slice of life feeling to it. The way that her own desires and her strengths as a person are foregrounded and is presented as the most sympathetic character was really striking to me. And there's also her befriending the boss's wife and talking about her being like one of those society girls, and like she's very perceptive about what it's like as a woman in this environment, how the men are in it for the sheep and the women are in it for the men,
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think that overall, just the way that she does get to be a woman with her own agency, but she's still a woman, even though she's always, in these situations where she's just surrounded by men, even to the point where when they're trying to land this particular job, she has to make a case for why she should be hired as the cook. Mm-hmm. And because the boss is like, no, men do the cooking. And
like you're going to be around a lot of rough language and whatnot.
Right. And she's just like, please, do you know what I've been dealing with for the last however many years?
Yeah, I wrote that down, that line. She's like, I've stood your language for 16 years.
Yeah, exactly.
She lands that really well. Yeah.
She does, yeah.
Yeah, I think, it's not really like a comedic performance, obviously, but I do think she has like that little bit of wit to her that does also make her kind of an appealing character to watch.
Well, I think overall that's why it works, because it's not all drama, it's not melodrama, and there are moments of, like you were mentioning, the scene in the tent, there's there's just these moments where she just gets to say something funny, or even just, charming or witty, and it's all part of being a well-rounded person. And that's what we get with Ida.
Right. And that is speaking to the slice of life element of it. That is how life is. It's not all melodrama. It's not all laughs. It's something like what we see here. Like, of all the films we're going to talk about today, this feels the most grounded to me. There's obviously a lot of heightened emotions in the other films that I'm sure we'll get to. But yeah, I just appreciated the quiet, sort of understated approach here. Another, I would say, her biggest quote-unquote moment in the film in terms of showiness is when her husband comes back and the son, he let him have a beer, right? And she slaps her husband, very rightly so, I would argue, but she then apologizes for it sort of in the morning, but then, you know, he makes it clear that just he's restless and he wants to quit what they're doing and move on, which is another big disappointment for her. And again, she sort of is playing that frustration without overplaying it into like a cheap melodrama kind of way. And she is given the opportunity to explain to her son just how difficult it is to really change her husband's mind. For some reason, that scene or that sort of exchange for her really reminded me of women in my life, women in my family, I should say, who have dealt with stubborn husbands. And they sort of express it in a way that's like, I'm just tired of fighting really at this point. Like it's too much of a struggle. I've been trying to change his mind on this or this for years. It's no go. And it's sort of like she's resigned to it, but not in a way that like you pity her necessarily. So it's a really nice blend there.
Yeah, honestly, I don't know very many women in my life that haven't at some point gotten to this in their marriages.
Sure, yeah.
Like, to be perfectly honest, and I'm not saying that just to be funny, like it's really true. I mean, and I think that one thing that I say a lot is that people don't change, and I don't mean that in terms of individuals. I mean, we as humans do not change that much. And when you see a film like this that came out in 1960 that looks so, in so many ways, looks familiar to actual marriages that I observe nowadays, it just furthers my point, I think, that this is what marriage looks like between two people who have really committed to spending their lives together. And even though he's just like, oh, well, I'm just going to leave whether you come or not, I don't know if he really means that.
Right.
Or if he just says it because he knows that she's not going to just let him go. I'm not sure. But the point is that the two of them, the relationship that they have, especially when we get into what happens at the end too, it feels real because it is real.
Yeah.
It's really reminiscent of what actual marriage looks like, not just what we normally are told it's supposed to look like in the movies.
Yeah, totally. And I will say that just watching this again, it made me long for like a film of this nature that is exploring a mature relationship. Like these are not just young 20-somethings. It's not even like a marriage story type of situation here. Like these are people who have lived a long life, not like elderly, but still are just this mature couple just dealing with things as regular mature couples would do. I just feel like we don't really get a movie like this anymore, at least on mainstream level.
Right.
Which,
yeah, we get it in TV, but not in movies.
That's true. Yeah. So then he does end up sticking around a little bit to enter this contest that would like benefit the kid who was just born. He loses, but then he gambles his way to winning enough for a down payment on some property and a horse, which is a Sundowner. That's what they name him. And they do settle on a house. And so he decides to go off and do some more gambling and manages to gamble away all of their money that would have gone to this down payment. And she is obviously devastated. So he tries to make good by entering him into a race. The horse wins, but then the win is like protested or something, like he's disqualified. I'm not entirely sure what exactly is happening there.
Interference, but I couldn't really see what the interference was.
No, I know. It's sort of brushed over. But by the end, she is sort of laughing it off in a way, like feeling like they're even in some respects. Like they decided to just ride off with Sundowner, and it's like all is sort of resolved. I'm curious if what you made of the ending itself.
I think that as much as we've talked about how the movie is a slice of life, I think that was the right ending in a weird way. I don't know how any other type of ending would have worked, because
yeah, that's true.
I mean, there's, on the one level, of course, you think, well, I want to see her get what she wants. I want her to get to settle down on this farm. And I don't get the sense when this ends that that's not eventually possible. There's going to come a time. I mean, the contest that he has where he's got to shear sheep, it about breaks him. Like he
it
physically,
looks like a boxing match.
Right. Yeah, like physically,
like they're having to wipe him down.
Yeah, exactly. And up against this old man, who is the worst of his company. And he's like, I don't know why they sent me, but anyway, I love that scene.
Yeah.
But it's just, you get the sense he can't stay out,
No. Right.
out in the world forever. And even though she doesn't get to have what she really dreams of right now, that eventually it's going to happen. They've both come to terms with, like, this is where we're at. And I love that ending. And I think that her just kind of laughing about it just makes sense, because it's like, yeah, I was this close to my dream. It didn't work out. I'm either going to laugh or cry. I'm going to choose to laugh.
Right. Yeah. And I do think that the ending does strike the perfect tone of sort of just what the whole film is about, which is sort of like perseverance and being with each other through and through. And the film is not necessarily about settling down necessarily. It is just about moving forward and just being there for the other person, but always being there with each other. So that's why, it's a sort of for me, like almost a modern ending where it's not like fully just like, oh, this is this nice, neat ending. They've decided to settle down. That's it.
Right. Yeah. It doesn't come to a full resolution like what we might hope for her, but it really fits the characters and it fits the movie that we've been watching up to that point.
Exactly. And you still do feel like she's going to be okay.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. She wants to settle down, but she's perfectly happy with her life, and she obviously does truly love her husband,
right?
And that is ultimately what matters the most.
Yeah. One other thing I just wanted to note here is Deborah Kerr does get top billing in this film, and the reason I mention this is because there's a very lovely quote from Robert Mitchum, who famously just valued Deborah Kerr as his favorite ever co-star to work with. He said that he was perfectly fine with just letting her have the top billing, even though, some male co-stars have had weird issues with that during this time period. Like the man always has to be the lead and whatnot. And even though he himself was a leading man at the time, he was perfectly fine with letting her do it. And the quote he said was, "You can design a 24-foot sign of me bowing to her if you like." Which is just very sweet and a testament to how much he loved her and she loved him. It was a lifelong friendship. They would make 4 films, 1 TV movie together. And so I think you can see just the sort of unspoken bond that they have just in this film. So anything else on Miss Deborah Kerr before we move on?
Just that I love her, and again, I'm sad that she doesn't have an Academy Award, a competitive one.
Yeah, I love her as well. Again, really sad that this is the end. I wish I could be talking about her in The Innocents, which is the very next year.
I know.
An incredible performance. But yeah, at least she did eventually get that honorary Oscar. Well, let's move on to a pretty big performance that many people have seen, which is Shirley MacLaine in The Apartment. This is Shirley MacLaine's second Oscar nomination. She was nominated 2 years before this for Some Came Running. Somewhat of a similar type of nomination where the film isn't precisely about her. She's in a co-lead situation where her male co-star is the primary lead, but her role is prominent enough that she gets this lead nomination, plus the fact that she's been being touted as a star. That's just the politics of the day at the time. If you're a star, you're in lead. Shirley MacLaine is very much in demand at this time, and this is a big Billy Wilder film coming right off of Some Like It Hot, which also starred Jack Lemmon. Here he is again, working with Jack, and Shirley, I think, fits in quite nicely with Billy Wilder's style. The apartment, it centers on a guy named C.C. Baxter, played by Jack Lemmon, who is this office worker at a large insurance company in New York City. He seems like a sort of average office drone type, but he's also lending out his apartment to various company managers to carry out their extramarital affairs. Meanwhile, Shirley MacLaine plays Fran, the elevator operator at his workplace, who he takes a liking to, but she is in her own affair with Sheldrake, played by Fred McMurray, who is the head of personnel at the office. And Sheldrake finds out about Baxter's scheme, so he promotes him in exchange for getting in on this whole apartment deal. So Sheldrake and Fran get to have this meeting at this place, but after one very bad interaction, she is left alone at the apartment and decides to take sleeping pills that leads her in a bad state, and Baxter discovers her and takes it upon himself to take care of her and nurse her back to health, and they develop a relationship from there. So Shirley MacLaine here, she's in the Best Picture winner of 1960. Here's a rather glaring fact for you. This is the first time that a Best Picture winner is even nominated for Best Actress since 1953, 7 years ago, for From Here to Eternity, Deborah Kerr. That's not great, but she does she does not end up winning alongside the film, but would love to know your thoughts on Shirley MacLaine, an actress who very much has endured through many eras of Hollywood through the years, and what you think of her here in one of her most iconic performances.
Well, I love Shirley MacLaine. She's one of my favorite actresses ever. And a big reason is because she's always been someone who just speaks her mind. She is who she is. Yeah. She doesn't apologize for it. And I've always aspired to be that, you know. One of the first movies I saw her in was Steel Magnolias, which I love Julia Roberts, but it forever breaks my heart that MacLaine was not nominated for that one, because that is like, oh, I just love that performance so much. And I mean, when I was a kid, I used to be like, I'm going to grow up to be Louisa Boudreaux.
That tracks. I love that for you.
Oh, thank you.
Yes.
But yeah, I love Shirley MacLaine. I love her performance here in The Apartment. I you know, there's so many films where she's just been great, even when the movies weren't great too. You know, like I recently, just for fun, I decided to rewatch Mrs. Winterbourne, a movie I haven't seen probably since it came out. I was doing a Brendan Fraser like rewatch, and I love her in that movie too. The movie itself, that's a whole other conversation. But I just, you know, it's just anytime she pops up on the screen, there's this blend of delight and like, oh no, what's she gonna do? What's she gonna say? Like a little bit of terror.
There's an unpredictability factor.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, and it's so much fun, and that's why she's one of my very favorites. Yeah.
Yeah, I love her. I love this movie. One of my favorite Best Picture winners of all time. I don't know about you.
Yeah, I love The Apartment. It's such a great film.
Yeah, I think the way that it is sort of capturing modern life at that time and really sort of satirizing the workplace, especially all these like big corporations, is really well done. There is like a truthfulness in how it is exploring modern relationships, and I do think it's really elevated by these two performances at the center, Jack Lemmon and Shirley MacLaine, who are playing these characters who are lonely, you know, and are trying to figure out what it is that they want and how to get it. And both of them are just so charming as screen performers, just individually, but especially together. They just have like this really easy chemistry. And I guess it's just like a lack of pretension that just makes it really easy to root for them.
Yeah, there's something about both of them, Bud and Fran, where I think because they're lonely people, um, they're drawn to each other, but they also have very specific goals. In his case, he wants to get ahead in his career. You know, she really wants to find love, but also she wants to live kind of an exciting life too. And I think that the goals that they think they want, they don't realize necessarily match up, but they can.
Yeah.
But they build this beautiful friendship that I think is such a great foundation. And I think that the two, Jack Lemmon and Shirley MacLaine together, are just, I don't know what it is. Maybe it's, I'm not exactly sure why they work so well together, but they just do. And I think part of it is just because of how they inhabit their characters so well. But one of the interesting
Mm.
things about The Apartment to me is when people talk about, drama versus comedy slash musical at certain awards, like with the Golden Globes and
Yep.
stuff, and they complain nowadays about, like, well, that's not a comedy. And I think that when you look at a movie like The Apartment, you see this has always been kind of, where is the line between comedy and drama? Because this
Right.
is considered a comedy, but it's not a hilarious movie.
That's true.
It's very grounded.
Mhm.
It definitely has a lot of funny moments and some things that are silly, a bit over the top even, in a good way.
Yeah.
But it's not a straight up, like, wall to wall laughs like we would typically think of a comedy being. And I think that this is an example of how comedy, really done well, incorporates drama perfectly too.
Yeah. It's a sharp type of humor
Yeah.
and it's like it does have the satirical moments, I would say, enough to
Hmm.
sort of classify it as that. It is sort of like the Sundowners for me, where it's just like you got the drama, you got the comedy, that's just life, you know?
Yeah.
So I guess it has enough comedy to be classified as that. But yeah, another thing I did want to establish with this performance before we dive too much into it is that apparently Shirley MacLaine wasn't given the full script.
I did not know
She
that.
was given about 40 pages, and she didn't even know how it was going to end. She didn't know like what this was leading to necessarily. I'm curious if maybe you think that may have helped her in her performance, maybe made her feel more unpredictable, to go back to that, or spontaneous, maybe less predetermined. Like, do you get the sense of that just from watching her?
Yeah, actually, that's interesting because I did not know that before. I'd never heard
Yeah,
that,
me
but
neither. Yeah.
but yeah, I think maybe that does kind of explain why she's able to be a little bit more unpredictable, I think is the right word. There's this chaos to her a little bit.
Yeah.
Kind of a controlled chaos, and knowing that she doesn't know where she's going, I think really, yeah, that does add to it. That's interesting.
It's very fitting with this character of Fran, I think.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Yeah.
that she is really just sort of living day to day, just like in the present. And I don't know if this character even necessarily is thinking that far ahead of what the true end goal will be. She obviously just wants to be happy, and she wants to find love, and she wants to find that balance. But yeah, I don't know if she has like something in mind, like an end goal necessarily.
Right. Yeah. And I think that's what makes Fran such an interesting character,
Mm-hmm.
especially, I don't know, just the way that McLean plays her. I think that there is this, I know I've heard some people refer to her as the manic pixie dream girl,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that there is some of that,
Mm-hmm.
but I think that what she gives us is a little deeper than that, because even though she doesn't necessarily know where she's going, she definitely wants things in life, and she jumps at opportunities. And
Right, exactly. And I do think that, to speak to maybe some of that criticism, like towards the beginning, obviously she's cut her hair in the very pixie like way.
yep.
That's just kind of I mean, that's sort of what Shirley MacLaine's hairstyle was at the time, to be fair. But she does just kind of have like this easy, cool sort of rapport with Jack Lemmon. Like, there's a guy in the elevator who's sort of sexually harassing her, and she kind of sasses him back. She has like this little swish of her hand that I love whenever she's
Hmm.
pressing the elevator button. I love whenever that happens. Just like it's one of those like really random sort of character details that I feel like only she really came up with herself.
Yeah.
But I also, to speak to that as well, like heard that there were a few lines even that she was just saying offhand, just like when they weren't even filming, that Billy Wilder then incorporated into the film. Like there's a moment where she says, or she said in real life, just like on a lunch break, like, why do people have to love other people? Something like that. Instead of like, why don't people just love giraffes or something? Like, it just hurts too much, essentially, to love another person because it's so messy and so complicated. And that is later integrated into what Fran actually says in the film in its own way. So there is kind of like a little bit of her almost not necessarily making it up as it goes along, but just sort of aiding in the construction of this character, sort of building on top of what Billy Wilder has established from whatever pages she was given.
Yeah. That's so interesting. Because that just feels like a Billy Wilder line. So
Yeah.
it's interesting that she just kind of said that.
Yeah.
I love that.
Mm-hmm.
I love that moment in the script too, or in the movie.
Definitely. So. He asks her out to the theater. She does have plans. Of course, it's to meet with Sheldrake, but she agrees to meet him at the theater. And what I really like about that scene as well is that part of me is like, oh, she's just a very naturally friendly person. She is charmed by this guy. But at the same time, he is a little bit too insistent with her about that. And just like I really, really wanting her to go with him to the theater, even though she has established many times that she has plans. I wonder how much of that is her just sort of wanting to be nice and courteous, even if she doesn't even feel like she wants to do that necessarily. Like she still at that point in the film just wants to figure this relationship out with Sheldrake. But she's also like trying to a little bit appease this guy. And that's another thing that I thought about in terms of a real life connection of what I think a lot of women have had to deal with, which is just really insistent guys who won't leave them alone. And, you know, she kind of just has to say whatever it is to sort of resolve the situation so that she's not like in danger. Like obviously this is not like what that is leading to, but I still think that that's like this really subtle undercurrent for me. I don't know if I'm just reading too much into it, but that just felt like, you know, how a modern woman in 1960 would have to sort of navigate the sort of sexual politics of the day, if that makes sense.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I don't think you're reading too much into it at all. Mm-hmm. This is another example to me of people don't change.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Because, yeah, like, I think a lot of women have been in this situation. I know I have. Mm-hmm. And it's not always even just that you're afraid of being in danger, but there is always that sense whether you think someone could turn violent or not, and most of the time it's not that you're worried about that. You just don't want people to feel bad.
Right.
And so it's like for her, she's had a little bit of a connection with Bud. She likes talking to him in the elevator. He's a nice enough guy. He clearly is lonely and has these 2 tickets and no one to go. And I think for her it's that, you know, fine, you know, I've got plans, but and it's not even that she offers it in like a resigned, okay, fine, I'll go type of way. Mm-hmm. But I think in her mind, at least from my own personal experiences, interjecting that into her brain. Yeah. I think for her, it's like, well, I do feel bad for this guy. I don't want him to have to be by himself. So I'll see if there is something I can work out to be nice. It's not that she has a burning desire to go to the show with him, but she just doesn't want him to feel sad.
Right. That's a really good read on the character. And there is just like this, she blends some of the melancholy nature of just her being in this situation and just a sort of worldliness and sort of regret of being caught up in this relationship with Sheldrake with a little bit of just, I still want to be a good person. And I also am almost can take a little bit of like dark humor in my situation. Like here I am caught up in this situation. I feel like that's something that we don't often get in these kinds of films, is just this sense that even though we feel bad for everything she's been through, she can sort of toss things off a little bit in a way that's like, oh, this is, of course I would end up in this situation, like, oh, that's life, like that's sort of like almost jaded type of feeling. I think she really expresses that element, you know?
Yeah. There's also something else going on in that conversation that we, the
Mm-hmm.
audience, know that they don't, which is that she's meeting Sheldrake at Bud's apartment.
Yes.
Neither of them know this.
Right. Some great dramatic irony. Yeah.
Yeah, it is. And it adds to the complexity of the scene for us as the audience of like, oh, this is going to be super awkward when they figure this out.
Mm-hmm. I think another great scene for her is at the Christmas party, and his secretary, Sheldrake's secretary, tells her all about the other women that he's been with, and she's sort of having to process this information. She doesn't want to make a scene necessarily, and he sort of we have Baxter trying to charm her with like this little bowler hat thing and like saying like, hey, we can go out together, and she just kind of smiles very politely and says like, I love her line reading here where she just is like looking down and is saying, this is a very bad day for me.
Yeah.
I really just felt the weight of that. Like you can really see her just trying to like politely decline his request, but is just so almost like unable to really contain her emotion there. But she plays that so perfectly.
She does, and that's one of those moments where it's like, oh, this is why she was such a standout in this movie, in a movie that was Best Picture, so obviously it stood out for a lot of things, but this really, it's moments like that really, I think, solidified her as a Best Actress for the year. And I think it's also just going into a little bit more of the film itself too, right there. I think we get these moments that we see Bud constantly putting his own wants into, like, he's so focused on what he wants and how lonely he is that he can't see what's going on with her. You know, like we got that with the theater tickets. We get that here where he's not really understanding, even though, I mean, obviously he doesn't know exactly what's going on, but he really is not understanding her emotions or her feelings. But I think that that's part of why, as things progress and as he kind of takes on this responsibility, it feels a little bit more like an earned progression, I guess, because he starts to understand that there's so much more to her that has been brewing under the surface that he didn't know was there because he didn't bother to take the time to find out.
Yeah. And to speak to maybe why that feels earned, I just think Jack Lemmon has that natural sort of empathetic capacity, more so than like a Fred MacMurray type, obviously. Who is just like on the opposite end of things.
Right.
Sad that he didn't get a nomination, by the way.
I know. I think maybe it was just a little too much for people.
Yeah. It's a tough role. It's a tough one, but he plays it pretty pitch perfectly for as unlikable as he is.
Well, it's just so different from what we normally saw him in up to that point too. Exactly. So I think that was where people were just like, "Oh, what?
Yes,
what is happening?"
Right. But eventually we do get the turning point where she is in the apartment and having that conversation with Sheldrake, and like she got him a record for Christmas. He clearly didn't care enough to even give her anything, so he just gives her $100. So she just feels really almost cheap and is just disillusioned by this whole arrangement at this point. And she does stay behind and cries to herself and is taking these sleeping pills, and that's a really tough sequence to watch for me. It's just really you're feeling the despair, especially because up to this point she does have like that really charming, easy, sort of likable, rootable edge to her that seeing her in this state is really quite heartbreaking. She plays the highs and lows of that very well. And of course she does have to be recovered, and she does. Curious if you had any other thoughts on just that sequence and how it plays out, if you feel like that is the natural response that she would have, is to just feel like completely empty and worthless at this point.
I think it makes a lot of sense because she's been in this sort of really one-sided relationship for a while, and she's constantly, even outside of that, she's constantly, as we were talking about, being hit on by different guys, like in the elevator or whatever, like being sexually harassed all over, everywhere she goes. And all she really wants is to be loved. And in that moment, she's realizing she is not. And I think that this is where the film really, I think, becomes what it is. And I think this is why if it had just been this, like, sort of relationships and non-relationships comedy drama movie, then I think it would have been kind of forgotten. But because you have this extra layer where you're really dealing with real human emotions and that feeling of absolute despair and pain, I think she's the reason that this movie has had the long life that it has. I really believe that. Yeah. And I think it's because of her work there, because she really sells the emotion, and because she gives us something that doesn't feel like, what are you doing? Stop it. You have so much to live for. It really feels like I'm with her in that moment of just,
you get it.
Oh my gosh, this is heartbreaking,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then after that, as she's recovering, she's getting more into her background, telling Baxter all about it, of like being very unlucky in love and just like in life in general, how one of her former lovers is like in prison, and how she failed the typing test at this insurance company. She wanted to just be, a secretary. She failed that, so they just kind of stuck her in the elevator, which is how she met Sheldrake. And I love that scene as well, because we're really seeing it all really come crashing in on her, just like how her life has gone in the wrong direction for her, and it's just really affecting and raw. And it feels like that sort of thing where it's like you're so in your own mind, and then when you externalize it and you open yourself up in that way to another person, it can be very cathartic and really allow you to really like process these issues that you've been through or that you're currently going through. So I think the way that she sort of modulates that from just sort of naturally just like telling her life story to then like really realizing the gravity of how her life has gone is very affecting for me.
Yeah. Well, it also really, I love that. Thank you. It also really deepens the character and our understanding of her, because up till then we've seen her as this happy-go-lucky, like, oh, she's in this, unfortunate relationship, but she's young, she's carefree, she'll bounce back.
Right.
And when you get to this point, you realize that she's lived a lot of life before we met her, and she's been through stuff. Like, everyone we know has been through stuff that we'll never know about. And I think that this is such a good window into that. And when you really get to hear the breakdown of, like, even up to she couldn't get a job as a secretary, so she had to take a job as the elevator girl.
Yeah.
How heartbreaking that is for her, but also just what that ended up doing to directly put her where she is right in this moment. I think that is where, like, when people call her the manic pixie dream girl, I think this is where that becomes not true, because you learn that there's so much more to her than that.
Exactly. Right. And, it's like after that, she does decide to sort of cool it off with Sheldrake until the divorce is settled, but she's still clearly not happy, and she's communicating that sense of disappointment to him when he talks about how, like, hey, everything worked out all right, but she's just like, yeah, I guess so. Like, there's just kind of a wistfulness in her tone that is so perfect, because it's not like self-pity. You're not really pitying her, right? And she's also not like that male fantasy construct either, as you're alluding to. At least I don't think so. She feels real. And like I said, there's just that perfect sort of bemused feeling to how she speaks about her life sometimes that really does feel like her way of coping with how unhappy she is. And that just feels very authentic to me. And Jack Lemmon does the same thing, which I think is what makes the two of them such a perfect sort of match for each other, not just as characters, but just like as actors. They feel like they're on the same wavelength.
Yeah, absolutely.
Obviously, the ending is much discussed, where it becomes, for me, like a great New Year's Eve movie, where it is New Year's Eve, and she is still clearly not in a great place, but she does sort of perk up when Sheldrake lets her know that Baxter denied him a key to the apartment. And also he decided to just quit this company altogether, like quit the whole arrangement, quit this company. He's moving on. And I think she's just very proud of him for having the gumption to do that. And we see the classic rom-com moment of her running through the streets to be with him, which I still think is earned, no matter what people say about such types of scenes in films. I think this is a great example of that. And they have their really lovely, going back to the gin rummy game and asking him to deal.
I love that. I love this ending. It's so good.
It's perfect. And you know what? If we want to sort of compare it to the Sundowners as well, I think it also has some ambiguity to what's next. You don't necessarily feel like, are they even, who knows? Maybe they don't even need a full relationship. Maybe they just have like a nice bond friendship. Who knows? I don't know. But either way, they're made for each other.
Yeah.
And I'm glad they found each other.
Yeah, definitely. And it really, whether they stay together and live happily ever after or not, doesn't really matter, because in that moment they understand each other and they're there for each other, and they will be, for many years to come. At least that's the sense that you're left with.
Absolutely. So I love, love, love this nomination. Anything else you want to get into before we get into our final losing nominee?
I think we've pretty well covered it. I love this movie so much. It really is one of my very favorite movies of all time, actually.
Wow. Excellent. Yeah. Well, I'm glad it won Best Picture, because I think it's not necessarily a kind of film that would win more often than not, especially even like at that time. I think there was a big emphasis on bigger movies and epics and whatnot.
Yeah, but I think that it is representative of where the world was going. As I was saying kind of at the beginning, as we're moving into the 1960s, that this is the first film of the decade to win Best Picture, I think really signifies a change in the film landscape, even if not necessarily the Best Picture landscape overall.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm sure most listeners have watched The Apartment, but if you haven't, truly, of any of these films, this is the one to watch.
Yeah, definitely.
All right, well, let's move on to Melina Mercouri for Never on Sunday. So this is our only first-time nominee of this group, and this is also her only nomination, so the only time we'll be able to talk about her here. Melina Mercouri was a Greek actress. She came from an influential political family, and she would later go on to become a member of parliament and a minister of culture in Greece. I feel like this is something that's going to be coming up more and more as we go through this series, where some actresses are able to kind of parlay their fame and just their name being in the public eye into having a role in politics and making real change in the world, which is also the case with Shirley MacLaine, Glenda Jackson, certainly Jane Fonda. So I'm excited to be getting into this era of these kinds of actresses who feel inspired to make some real change in the world. So Melina Mercouri had made a few films before Never on Sunday, but this was her big breakout worldwide. She won the Cannes Film Festival Award for Best Actress, so that was pretty significant. And the film is about a woman named Ilia, played by Melina, who is a free-spirited sex worker living in Greece. She only has sex with men that she wants to have sex with. And one day she meets a visiting American named Homer, played by Jules Dassin, who also directed the film and wrote the film. And he is this sort of scholar who's searching for meaning about how, like, the world has lost some of its beauty and its class, and he thinks that originated from Greece. And he becomes fascinated by Ilia, but he doesn't want her to do what she's doing anymore. So he goes about teaching her philosophy and is trying to convince her that she shouldn't be doing what she's doing. There's also a subplot where there's this local pimp who they call No Face, who is mad at Elia for sort of giving the women too many ideas. So he pays Homer to educate her and essentially like get her away from his women, especially since he's trying to raise the rent on the building that he owns that they all live in. So let's talk Melina Mercouri. What do you think of this performance?
I think this one is a lot of fun.
Mm-hmm.
It's the only film of hers that I've seen, so I can't talk about her career with any sort of intelligence. But her performance in this film, and I think this movie overall, it's interesting how different it is from the rest of the nominees, but how there are still some similarities in like just little through lines, I think, that you see in a couple of them. But I think out of all of them, this is the wildest, and I think she's having the best time out of anybody there.
Yeah, and I'll just add that before I get into it, I'm excited to be entering an era that finally had the Academy becoming friendlier to non-English language performances.
Yeah.
She does speak some English in the film, but it's pretty well balanced with Greek. And I do think that she is pretty emblematic of why it's a good thing that the Academy started recognizing like these homegrown actors. And it's the same reason why I love seeing Anna Magnani win for The Rose Tattoo and then get another nomination for Wild as the Wind, which is that we're seeing a very fresh and a different style, I would say, of acting that is less self-conscious, more natural, to the extent where you feel like you would maybe even come across characters like this in your own life. They could be your neighbor or someone in your family. There's just more of an immediacy there that doesn't feel like as studied as much.
Yeah.
To speak somewhat broadly about it, I'm not saying like it's all that and not that, but I think she is such a magnetic presence. I do have issues with the film at times, which I'm sure we'll get into. Some of her characterization feels a little bit like, since we're talking about it, a little bit Manic Pixie Dream Girl.
Yes.
But I do think she does manage to give this character a sense of worldliness and this larger than life attitude that just like naturally draws people to her, especially men, but women too. Everyone wants to just sort of be in her orbit. She just has that glow to her.
Yeah, she really draws people in because of her this presence that she has and this light that people just want to be around. And it's a fun character, it's a fun performance. I agree with you, there are definitely some issues, and we can I'm sure we'll get into some of the specifics there. But overall, I just think in terms of I agree with you. I think embracing these performances, these characters, these movies from around the world, when the Academy finally really started to do that, you get these interesting entries like this one in a lineup full of movies that are very American, that mostly are actresses that have been actually all actresses that have been nominated before. And just getting that kind of breath of fresh air, I think makes it a lot of fun. And even though the movie itself has some issues, I think that just what she did for this lineup is great, and it was really needed.
I agree. Yeah, and she really just like is announcing herself immediately in this film. The first scene is just her like laughing and running into the docks on the water. Homer is told that he's already met one of the local legends already. And she's like flirting. She has just like this really breezy, carefree energy. One of those like live for life kind of people that I'm secretly jealous of.
Yeah.
And she really just carries the movie for me from start to finish, especially compared to this absolute drip of a guy, Homer.
Oh my gosh.
Which, I mean, Jules, I think, does give himself like such an unlikable role here. First of all, his name being Homer is irritating enough.
Right.
And I get irrationally angry whenever he's like disrupting this local community and just like trying to insert himself into it and acting like he knows everything about life because he's a scholar, and just like making them all feel pretty demoralized.
Yeah, well, I think that's one of the things that's interesting about this movie and why it feels a little bit progressive for 1960. It's like, oh, we're talking about this now. We're talking about mansplaining and this kind of American ego of, well, I can't believe you don't know your own history and your own literature, and I'm going to come in and educate you on all of it. And he just has this attitude.
Condescending, yeah.
Yes, very. Exactly. Thank you. And I think he does such a great job with it, but it also makes the two of them, the way that they play off of each other, it just makes it that much more striking and makes the movie that much more, I don't know, interesting, I guess, maybe layered.
Yeah, and thankfully he's punched in the face on multiple occasions.
And he deserves it every time.
Absolutely. I was applauding each time.
Yep.
But like even in the beginning, she's like helping to smooth over a fight when he like starts applauding a guy for dancing in a bar, which he takes offense to, and she's able to explain that, you know, in Greek culture, this guy was not dancing for people's entertainment. He was dancing for himself, not other people. And he's just like so stubborn and just like has his own way of viewing the world that it's hard for him to really take any of this in. But we're seeing just even from the beginning her own street smarts, you know, and her wisdom about her community and just this culture. Like he can read as much as he want about it in his books, but until you've actually been in this community, you can't really have a full understanding of it. And that's what makes her such an appealing person to follow in the film, is she just projects so much confidence, even in like the moments where you want to like be a little bit like Homer and correct her in the sense of like her making up the different endings to the plays that she watches, where she's like always making it into a happy ending regardless of how unrealistic it is. Well, it's like, well, that's not really what the story's about. But at the same time, you're just kind of so charmed by her that it doesn't really matter. Like, you're just always watching her.
Yeah, well, it's so funny because he gets so mad. No, that's not what it is. And for me, I'm like, I like that better. I like her version. We'll go with that.
Yeah.
Medea took the kids and ran away.
Yes. Yeah, the Medea, the way that she tells the full story and it just like makes it into a happy ending. I love that whole sequence where he's just
I love it so much. Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah, he's just like trying to interject at a few points, and she's just like, yeah, the way she's kind of like telling it, she says it with such confidence that it all makes sense in her mind that I'm like, yeah, okay, that's a good alternate interpretation of the text. I'll allow
exactly.
it. Yeah.
Exactly. And that's the thing. It's like he gets so frustrated, but the way that she sells it, I'm like, yeah, I'll go with that. You know what? You're right. That's exactly what happened.
Yes. And I think that aspect of it is fascinating, that she has such a love for these Greek tragedies. And so they go to one, and they, of course, have an argument afterwards. And he's kind of like saying how he wants to make her have harmony again within herself. And at this point, she's just distraught and saying like she liked Greek tragedy before she met him. And now she hates it.
Because he made it tragic. He made it not fun.
Yeah. And I think that's the whole underlying message of the film, is just like him trying to impose the old ways of how to interpret text and how to just interpret life in general. And her just being like, I'm happy with the way things are. Almost everyone in my community loves me, obviously. And we know sort of like what our own culture is. We don't need to have you coming in and ruining it, essentially, which is what he does throughout the whole film.
Yeah. And I think that the fact that he is an American is very intentional. And it makes me wonder, and I should have try to do a little bit more research into this at the time, but it really does make me wonder how American audiences viewed this movie and if they really understood how skewered they were by it.
Yeah. That is a fair point. I think you could have a fair share of people in America being like, oh, well, that's obviously this guy is ridiculous. That would never be me.
Even though
but
really it's all
secretly
of them.
It is you, buddy.
Yep. Exactly.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Dudes I talk to on Twitter every day.
Well, there you go. Right. Unfortunately, this is all cyclical. But I love that just the next morning when the guys try to cheer her up, and they do, and then Homer, of course, comes around, is like trying to diagnose this guy who only likes to have relationships with like a certain kind of woman, and how that stems from him probably hating his mother. So naturally, the guy punches Homer. Again, I cheer. And
as he should.
Yes. And I love how she totally, gives it right back to him, and she's just like, give him harmony in that like mocking tone.
Mm-hmm.
It's just a really fun performance to watch.
Yeah, it is.
And the whole thing of like him giving her the whole like Pygmalion treatment of like wanting to make her into a more book smart, refined type of person. I feel like that's something that you read the sort of synopsis of the film and it's like, oh, this is just going to be like Pygmalion again, basically, but in Greece. But that's not really like what it's about. It's all kind of like a montage sequence, and it doesn't really last all that long.
Yeah, it's really about fighting back against that, because what he doesn't seem to understand is that doing this transformation that he so desires to do for her actually completely destroys the thing that drew him to her in the first place.
There you go. Yeah, well said. This whole process sort of is just making her less spontaneous, more depressed. But then I love when she puts back on the record that she really loves. Mm-hmm. And she just like lights up again. And it's this very gradual sort of reawakening. But then, of course, when she finds out that this no-face guy had been paying Homer for this whole education, this just completely causes her to revolt and then literally lead on like a full-on revolt with the other women against No-Face and just like disrupt the whole, like the Navy are coming in, this whole Navy fleet is coming in, and they're just like tossing things over, like mattresses and whatnot, and just like really causing like an actual uproar, and they're all jailed for it. But she's able to sort of negotiate on behalf of these women for better rent prices, and I'm like, wow, look at you. Mm-hmm. Like she could lead an army, truly.
Absolutely she could. And
I would follow her.
Yes. I would too. Mm-hmm. But yeah, and I think that's something that I don't know if we really touched on it much, but that's kind of the point of the movie too, is Homer is this obnoxious guy. He's obviously the right person to rope into this task, but the whole reason that No-Face wants to change her, wants to stifle her, mm-hmm. is because she's stirring up the other women and they're getting ideas. Yes. And we can't have that.
Dangerous. Yes.
Exactly. And that's the point. And so by the end of the film, you really do see the power and why men are terrified of educated women that stand up for themselves and that, that fight for their own interests. And that's ultimately really what this movie is about. It's not about Homer trying and failing to change this woman. It's about her influence, not just on the men in the community, but especially on the women in the community.
Right. Which is surprisingly progressive,
Mm-hmm.
And again, like you think of the setup of the film and you expect it to be one thing, but I love that it does really subvert that. And then by the end, it's like, she's even just helping out this local musician who is feeling discouraged once again as a result of a conversation with Homer. Who said that, oh, like he's not a real musician because he can't read music. And
yep.
She says this really lovely thing where she's like, the birds shouldn't stop singing because they can't read music, and it just speaks to the whole themes that we're talking about, which is you can't just learn everything there is to know in life from books, or even from coming at it from a place of like intellectualism like he does. Like, it's all about being in the present and just finding happiness in your own talents, your own community, and being kind to other people and respecting other people. And she really just embodies that through this performance and really is breathing so much life into a character that maybe in broad strokes can feel a little bit like a construct, perhaps. But, you know, I personally know people in my life who have that sort of larger than life energy. Like, I think when that criticism is heard sometimes, even in modern times, when people talk about someone being a little too over the top with a performance or something, like they just have like a loud presence. That's how some people are. Like, I don't know what else to say.
Yeah. No, I think that's well stated.
I just feel like, you know, you could say that this performance is over the top in its way because she's always so active and always doing something and speaking so passionately. But again, that's like the whole point of the character and the film, is to show the beauty of just honoring your community and not sort of like kowtowing to what other people are trying to impose upon you. So I love that aspect of it. Just to read a really funny quote of her from the time. This is about a paragraph, but really, really funny. When she was actually nominated for this Oscar, she did not want to campaign, which is fair and honorable. Mm-hmm. But here's what she said. This is a direct quote. She said, "At the beginning, I am very happy to have the honor, but what kind of honor is it? First, Luella Parsons writes they shouldn't give it to a foreign actress, but to a nice American girl like Doris Day, who makes pictures in Hollywood and not overseas. The UA people say I can't win unless I go back to Hollywood and make a campaign for the Oscar. What kind of campaign should I make? I'm not a Kennedy. I'm an actress, not a politician. What do they want me to do? Ring doorbells in Beverly Hills and say, 'Good day, my name is Melina Mercouri and I would like you to vote for me as the best actress of the year?' We have a saying in Greece that if you don't vote for yourself, the roof will fall down and the house will catch on fire. Why should I go back there and suffer? Before I was nominated, I was very happy and relaxed. Everybody loved me and the picture. Now I am not happy and I am not relaxed."
Oh, that's great.
Which is fair, you know?
Yeah.
Oscar campaigning can be very stressful and can feel perhaps at times antithetical to why you made it in the first place. So I love the bluntness of that.
Well, especially being a foreign actress who is basically being told, like, yeah, we don't want you here. We want American girls here. You know, how are you supposed to react to that?
Yeah, exactly. Because that is something that happened with, you know, Luella Parsons, people in the press. There was that feeling of, this is only supposed to honor Hollywood and American artists. Like, there was even
British artists. Just saying.
Yeah, that's true. Even in the beginning, there was some like discussion about like, oh, I don't know if we want to honor British artists like in the 40s, but right. Yeah, especially at this time, it was a little bit debatable. But I love that, sort of in keeping with the performance in the film, she's just like, I'm gonna just do this my way. I don't need you to impose your own like views of how I should live my life and campaign for this Oscar. I'm just gonna be me. So it's kind of meta.
Yeah, which is why she was so perfect in the role.
Exactly. Let's get to our big winner here, Elizabeth Taylor in Butterfield 8. Strap in. This is Elizabeth Taylor's 4th Oscar nomination in a row, and she finally wins, but this is one of those wins that is often disputed or just discussed as not a particularly earned win, either because of its quality or because people say that there were other reasons that she won that didn't have to do with her being the best of this lineup necessarily. Excited to hear our takes on that, but before we do that, we should mention that Elizabeth Taylor did not want to do this film, but as part of the studio system, she owed this one more film to MGM, and it was this. she is quoted as saying that she hated this character and described her as a sick nymphomaniac. And she said that the script was pornographic. So that's interesting. The film is based on a novel, and it tells the story of Gloria Wandress, played by Elizabeth Taylor, who is a young woman who loves sex. She's having an affair with a married man played by Lawrence Harvey, who we should mention apparently is a good luck charm because he was also the star of Room at the Top the previous year, where Simone Signoret won this award. So that's 2 in a row with Lawrence Harvey as your co-lead. But Gloria decides she might want to settle down with this guy, but he's married, so it's complicated. And it's sort of about her grappling with that and her past, just like as a promiscuous person. It's very dancing around the idea that is she maybe, a sex worker? Is she a call girl? Is she just a woman who really likes sex? And the film makes it out to be like, that's a bad thing. There's a lot going on here, but let's get into it. What are your thoughts on Liz Taylor as an actress, and what do you think of her here?
I like Elizabeth Taylor. I've never loved her the way other people have, which I think makes me a bad person. But
it's okay. Live your truth.
Like, I love Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf. I love Cat on a Hot Tin Roof. Like, some of those movies I love, but like outside of her Oscar-nominated work, I'm just kind of very hit or miss with her. And But I love the, going back to the activism and stuff. I love the humanitarian work that she did, and like what she used her fame for, especially later, I think was great. And so it's like, I don't dislike her as a person. I just have always been kind of like, on a lot of her films.
Yeah.
I don't know what that says about me, but
no, it's fine. We all have different opinions. You know how I feel about Greer Garson. So like, people love her. What do you think of her here, though?
I like her performance. I was about to say I like Butterfield 8. I don't like the movie. I don't think it's a movie that you necessarily enjoy.
No.
I don't think you're really meant to. But I think that she gives a good performance here. It's interesting because I think that, and I'm sure the production code had a lot to do with that, but I think they try to make it very clear that she's not a call girl. That, right in the beginning scene, she's very insulted that a man would pay for her company, that's not what she's about. I don't think it's exactly convincing, but I do think that that's what that's the point that they're trying to make. And I think that the fact that it doesn't totally land is a little bit of a problem with the movie overall. But I think that her role in it, I think that she does do a great job with the complexities of her emotions. She's kind of in these 2 separate love triangles, sort of. I'm sure we'll talk about that in a minute, but it kind of mirrored her real life.
Very directly, with Eddie Fisher as one of them.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So a little bit. Ooh. But I think that her role here and the work that she does, I think she really, considering that she did not want to make this movie, she still doesn't hold back. She gives it her best effort. She really does do great work here, because she's a talented actress, and she doesn't know how to not be professional, I guess.
Yeah. And that's what makes this such a fascinating performance and film to talk about, because it's definitely not something that I could really compare it to from any previous nominee, let alone a winner, just hating the film that they're in.
Yeah.
And showing such antipathy for the entire project and making it known publicly that she felt that way. And apparently I read that she even ignored the director in certain moments while filming it, sort of insisting on casting Eddie Fisher to be cast as one of those love triangle people, insisting on her own costumes and hair, and just the fact that she's not only nominated but wins the Oscar after all of that is just wild to me to this day.
Yeah.
I do think that some of that judgment on her character does show through a little bit in her performance. But yeah, I don't think this is bad. I think the movie is bad and extremely judgmental at the idea of a woman having sexual desire or wanting different sexual partners. And it turns into like this moral lesson by the end that just makes for kind of miserable experience watching it. But it also has campy moments.
Yeah.
Like the ending itself is a lot. But even in spite of all that, I agree that there's just, she is giving it her all. I think she is the best part of it, clearly. And there's something very unapologetic about the way she performs it. Sometimes Elizabeth Taylor just naturally exudes this energy that is like, yes, I am that bitch. Like, I will do whatever I want. I know what I want, and I'm gonna do whatever it takes to get it. I love that energy from her.
Yeah.
So I appreciate that. Like in the beginning, like when she's waking up in the apartment of this married man, she's smoking, she's drinking, she tries on the guy's wife's dress and finds this note with the $250 from this guy, like asking if that's enough money, and she writes "no sale" on the mirror.
In lipstick.
Yeah. Yeah. And all of this is done without a word of dialogue. It's just her being like fabulous Elizabeth Taylor, looking great, fully in control of the screen. And it's like, you're kind of saying, like, even if she didn't care for the film, she does give it her all. Like, she doesn't know how to not be fully committing to the role, no matter how much she hates it.
Yeah, I mean, she's still a professional.
Yeah.
She's, by this point, she becomes a 4-time Oscar nominee, and she's done other work too. She's a professional, and she's going to do the work even if she's not going to be happy about it.
Right, exactly. To go through it a little bit, I mean, there's a lot of movie in here, so we can't really touch on everything. I'm curious for you if there was like a scene partner here that you felt like she was even close to being equally matched with.
No.
That was not the case for me, per se.
No, she is like head and shoulders above everybody else.
Even Lawrence Harvey.
At all times.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Who I think is very good at playing that type of asshole guy. So
yeah, it's interesting. I don't know who could have matched her in this movie, but it's interesting to imagine how other actors would have done opposite a different actress.
Yeah. That's true. Yeah. She just kind of just is sucking up so much energy just by her sheer screen presence that it's really hard for anyone to match with her. I kind of morbidly enjoy the dynamic that she has with her mother. I believe played by Betty Field. Or the mother's friend is Betty Field, I think. Either way, I don't really understand that particular
Those two old grouchy ladies.
Yes.
Mildred Dunnock is her mom.
That's it, right. Betty Field is the friend.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I love that there's just clearly no love lost between her and the friend. They seem to just despise each other. And she has just like this really complicated relationship with her mother. At a certain point, she does finally decide to be upfront with her after it feels like the Mildred Dunnock character has sort of been in denial a little bit about what her daughter has been through and what she does. So eventually she's just like, we both know what kind of girl I've been. Mama, face it, I was the slut of all time. Which is quite a line. Which causes her mother to slap her. And she blames her mother for, like, not slapping her in the past or, like, confronting her when she's come home, like, soaked in gin. And is sort of, like, placing the blame on her mother, in a sense.
Yeah, which I think I understand where she's coming from, because she's basically saying, like, Mom, you didn't parent me.
Yeah.
I went through all this. I became this person because you just were, not there to do this when I needed you to, Yeah.
It's thorny, I would say, as a film in many respects. But, the whole thing of her going off with what's his name? Liggett, I believe. Lawrence Harvey's character. Just some of those sequences I find to be really kind of a bore, to be honest.
Yeah.
I just feel like Lawrence Harvey doesn't have much charisma here. The dialogue isn't helping matters. I wrote down this exchange that they have just to demonstrate what they're working with here. They're about to go on his boat, and she says, "Where are you bound for, Captain?" And he says, "Out of frustration, bound for ecstasy." And she says, "I've heard a lot about ecstasy." And he says, "It's everything they say and more." And she says, "If you'd kindly show me to my quarters, Captain, you can lift anchor anytime." And I'm just like, what is this dialogue?
I can't believe this didn't get nominated for writing.
I mean, really competing with The Apartment here.
Oh, yeah. There's a lot of that. That's just so cringy.
It's just very, bad soap opera feeling for a lot of it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, right from the beginning, there's going to be some issues. Her name is Gloria Wanderess.
Wanderess.
I mean, that's a James Bond character.
Yeah, it is.
It's just, yeah. Right from the beginning, it's just not set up to be the great and insightful film that it probably thinks it is.
Definitely not. Yeah. I don't know if the book is different, but it feels like something was lost in translation there.
Yeah, I don't know that I want to read it and find out.
I definitely don't. But there is this sequence where she runs off with the mink coat that she had put on in the beginning, which was from Liggett's wife. So she's searching for her all over town, and that's where he finds out more about her involvement with these other men, which then leads him to berating her. And she wants to return the coat back, but he just throws it right back at her. And she sort of feels like that because she has this mink coat that she's like sort of accepted payment in exchange for her relationship with him, which then causes this big breakdown scene. I would love to know your thoughts on this, where she reveals to him how she was sexually abused as a child, and also that the worst part of it is that she liked it. And that's the reason she is the way she is.
So this is a scene that, with a better script, could have worked. And the reason I say that is because one of the things, not to get all deep and psychological on your podcast.
That's what we're here for.
But one of the problems with child sex abuse, especially in that 12 to 14, 15-year-old range, is that sometimes kids don't realize they're being abused because they do enjoy it. And because it feels good, it's unlocking things that you're right on the cusp of starting to understand and feel for yourself. And, so it's a very complicated thing. But the problem is that this movie and this script have not been smart enough to really make a scene like this or a line of dialogue like that work.
Yeah.
And also it really, because so many people don't understand that really difficult issue of child sex abuse and of what that really means and what that does to a kid of that age, because so many people don't understand that, it also doesn't work at all because it just sounds salacious and weird and creepy instead of really being this insightful moment of truth.
Yes, that was my big issue with it, is that it feels just like that it's played for shock value.
Yeah.
And is not interested whatsoever in digging into the nuances of that.
Exactly. Yeah, and whether it's that it doesn't feel like it needs to, or it just doesn't want to take the time to do it, I'm not sure, but it really makes that scene feel so gross and so exploitative in some ways too.
And that feels kind of insidious, and I don't know what kind of effect that has on an audience, but it's not good. It really turned me off from the film in general.
Yeah.
But, just to speak to a few of her highlights, I will say there's just this random thing that I picked up on that is this repeated pattern that she has that felt distinct about this character, where like she's in a conversation between her and another person. They say something that she disagrees with, and she has this pattern of just like very quietly shaking her head and saying no, which is a very small thing, but it's like those are the moments for me where you see her really trying to make a compelling character out of this, you know, of someone who is just exhausted by life. She's tired of the excuses. She's tired of all of it. And she's able to express that sense of a young woman who has really been through a lot in her life. Not unlike, you know, Shirley MacLaine and her journey. This one does not earn that whatsoever. But I think you can see her in these smaller moments, at least trying to make her feel like a human and not like Gloria Wanderous. You know?
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with that. I think that's well stated. I don't really have anything to add to that point.
Yeah, I appreciate her for at least, even if she hated the project, trying to make her character human. And then, of course, by the end, this guy goes to find her again. He's just ready to leave his wife for her. She doesn't really like the idea at first, but she decides maybe I'll give it a shot. But then she changes her mind again, and she drives away. And then he follows her, and she meets a rather grisly demise.
Oh my gosh.
That, unfortunately, I can't help but laugh at. It's just so cartoonish, so over the top, very sloppy filmmaking too. It's just wild.
That car just crashes. It smashes right into the ground.
Completely just smashes. Yeah.
Well, and even as much as I say I like her performance overall in the movie, like even in that moment where she's literally going off a cliff,
yeah,
and she's just kind of bouncing around in the car, like, what are you doing?
It's a lot. Yeah,
it is.
So it ends in a rather unfortunate place, I would say. But you know what? Kudos to her for giving it a shot with rough material.
Yeah. I think one of the ending frustrates me partly because she's finally at this point where she's going to break free. She's going to leave this life that she's been living.
She's going to like drive off into the sunset.
Right. She's heading to Boston. She's like, I'm going to go start something new. I'm going to be a different person. And she's finally made up her mind to do that. And then because she's so distraught as this guy that she's leaving is chasing her, she ends up driving off a cliff on accident. And the movie ends with him, not with her.
Yeah.
And like he has to go home now to his wife and like figure his stuff out. And it's like she's gone by that point. And it's just like, really, we're leaving off with this guy who never deserved her in the first place. And is also a big dull dud, and instead of with her getting to break free.
Yeah, and that's where it just starts to feel like some kind of moral lesson about her behavior. Exactly,
like she gets punished. Like we don't talk about punishing the men.
No, he gets to go home and he gets to say like, oh, I'm gonna go off and figure my shit out, basically.
Yeah, I'm gonna go find myself, and maybe I'll come back to you, and maybe I won't.
Right.
We'll see what happens.
Yes.
Whereas she gets
all
punished
be so lucky.
Yeah. Whereas she gets punished with death.
Yeah. So that sucks. Unfortunate that we have to end there, but there it is. Let's transition into talking about how she actually won the Oscar. Definitely one of the more unique narratives that we've had thus far, or since, really. But just to establish some of the precursor wins before this, Deborah Kerr won the New York Film Critics Award. Greer Garson won a Golden Globe and the National Board of Review. Shirley MacLaine won the Volpe Cup at Venice, and she won the other Golden Globe for comedy. And Melina Mercouri won at Cannes. And guess what? Elizabeth Taylor didn't win anything before the Oscars. She was the only one who didn't. So, like, just thinking about that from a modern perspective is, like, breaking my brain almost that that could happen, you know? It's almost like the Marcia Gay Harden winning for Pollock kind of situation.
Right. Every once in a while you get something like this, but
Mm-hmm.
it's very rare for a reason.
Yes, exactly. But then, of course, we have Elizabeth Taylor dealing with various medical ailments, including a severe case of pneumonia. She had to have a tracheotomy, so I think a lot of voters felt sympathy for what she was going through, even though I'm sure some of them still had some lingering feelings about her for stealing away Eddie Fisher from Debbie Reynolds. But what's funny is that, like, pretty much all the other nominees decided to just, like, sit this one out.
Mm-hmm.
um,
Didn't Shirley MacLaine specifically say, like, what was the line? I lost to a tracheotomy
that's
or something
exactly
like
it.
that?
Yeah. I lost to a tracheotomy. Yeah. And apparently, when she heard about the tracheotomy, she's like, she was going to go to the Oscars, but then she's like, you know what? I'm not going to be up on that stage that night. So she was right in the end. And like Deborah Kerr was staying in Switzerland. She didn't really feel like going. Melina Mercouri, obviously, like we said, had no interest in any of this, so she did not go. The only other person who was there was Greer Garson because she was asked to be a presenter. So it was a truly chaotic time. Can't even imagine what the discourse would have been if like film Twitter was around then.
Oh
Right.
my gosh, yeah.
Anyway, I'm curious if you think it was all like purely this sympathy vote for her, as a lot of people have said. Do you think there's more to it than that?
I definitely think that was a big factor. I,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if I can say honestly that it was the only thing because she had to get nominated in the first place.
Yeah.
And I think this is something that, film Twitter likes to forget is like when someone gets nominated, that means a bunch of people liked their work
Hmm.
and want to reward them.
Hot
So,
take.
I mean, shocking.
Yes.
But that's the thing. So it's like she got the nomination. It was her fourth nomination in a row,
Mm-hmm.
and also she was sick on top of it. She was also it's a good performance in a not great movie. I think all of those factors kind of helped her. Obviously people didn't love the movie. It only got 2 nominations overall, but it just there was definitely a lot of love and support for her and for her work going into this. So I don't think that it was just the fact that everyone decided to sit it out, the fact that she got sick. I think there was a lot of little things that kind of were the deciding factors for
Right.
her.
I would agree with that. Yeah. I mean, the performance itself is pretty showy on the
Mm-hmm.
whole. And she's going through a very intense emotional turmoil.
Yeah.
So it's just a roller coaster to watch. And we should mention also that the film was a hit because there was just a lot of like morbid curiosity, kind of. Um,
Mm-hmm.
just because she was such a public figure, like tabloid figure at the time, that there was just a lot of curiosity there for her to be playing a character who is like in a situation where she is quote unquote like a home wrecker,
Right.
art imitating life a little bit. Uh,
Yeah.
so there's that.
I
And mm-hmm,
sorry, I do think that if people had a crystal ball, voters back then
mm-hmm,
had a crystal ball and would know that Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf was coming,
yeah,
I think that she might not have won.
I would
Um,
agree. Mm-hmm,
yeah, but I think that this comes at a point in her career where it felt like,
right time. Yeah,
yeah, it's the time to do it.
yeah. Again, yeah, after 4 nominations here in a row, you could say that even though it's only taking place over 4 years, like, is there an overdue quote unquote narrative happening there? Maybe part of it.
Right.
It's showing that like she's such a constant presence and is delivering this great work year after year. I'm sure the sort of accumulative factor of it helped her a lot. Uh, so yeah, I think it's not just sympathy, even though I'm sure that was a solid part of it. It's just the right sort of combination of factors lined up for her.
I also think that Shirley MacLaine, she's a smart person,
Mm-hmm.
and I think for her to look at the race and know, like, I think we do have to take her illness into account pretty highly too, because
Yeah.
I don't think that she just said that out of nowhere. Like
Yeah.
she got that from people, like there
Mm-hmm.
were probably a lot of people who were like, yeah, this is probably not going to happen for you.
Right.
So,
Yeah. And I don't know if I fully spoke to like the gravity of her illness itself, where if she did not have that tracheotomy, she would have died. Like, it was a very grave situation. And even when Elizabeth went to the Oscars, there was a tracheotomy scar that was actually visible. So
yeah, she was very, very ill.
Yeah.
And I think that was something that, you know, we kind of sometimes when we talk about missing opportunities like Deborah Kerr that year, we miss out on the opportunity to reward people. And when you have Elizabeth Taylor on the brink of death, it's like, well, sure, I guess we give it to her now because we might never get another chance.
Yeah, literally. Right. So, yeah, I think that's it. I think we'll get to a little bit more of it, this, when we get to a few of these questions, if you're ready to jump into a handful of Twitter questions.
Sure.
From Fritz. Fritz said, now that you saw 4 nominations for Liz in a row, what would you give her the win for? Not counting Virginia Woolf, he says. I mean, for me, it's Cat on a Hot Tin Roof, and it's not even close.
Yeah, same.
Not that I would even give it to her for that. I would give that to Rosalind Russell for Auntie Mame that year. But if I were to choose, that is very clearly the one to go with. Yeah.
Yeah, if we're going to take an Oscar away from someone and give it to Liz, that's definitely the one.
Yep. Emily said, campiest moment in Butterfield 8.
Oh, boy.
What do you think?
I think it's the car crash.
It's definitely the car crash, I would say. But I will say that, again, just the delivery of her saying, Mama, face it, I was the slut of all time, is...
Yep.
Yeah, that's camp.
Definitely.
Let's get to some Greer Garson questions. Baby Clyde said, people complain about Rami Malek, but is the worst fake teeth performance in movie history given by Greer Garson here? I'm sure there are more egregious examples of teeth acting in film.
Maybe, but if we're going to talk Oscar history, I think, I don't know, I think Rami still takes it, but I think he learned from Greer.
I think so. Greer led the groundwork to Rami Malek.
Yep.
You heard it here first, folks.
It's a direct pipeline.
Yep. Sophia Simonello said, now that you've made it to the end of Greer's run, how would you rank all of her nominations? Okay. So I did write out my list here because I obviously saw this ahead of time. Awesome. My number 1 is the one that she won for, which is Mrs. Miniver. I think that is the exact right role at the right time. Perfectly fine with that win. Number 2 is Mrs. Parkington for me. Number 3 is Blossoms in the Dust. Number 4 is Madame Curie. Number 5 is The Valley of Decision. Number 6 is Goodbye, Mr. Chips. And number 7 is Sunrise at Campobello. Sorry, Greer. Listen, she had a great life. She won her Oscar. She had a very successful film career.
She did.
It is what it is.
That's right.
So,
I haven't seen them all, so I can't rank them. But I do agree that Mrs. Miniver was very deserved and a really great performance.
So you would say that her performance in Mrs. Miniver is better than Sunrise at Campobello?
You know, it's tight. It's close, but yes.
Yeah, I get it. All right. Dark Shaka said, Greer Garson was known for playing noble women. If you could choose one non-noble Oscar-winning role for her to play against type, which one would you pick? This is a very fascinating question. I think they're kind of saying like a role that another actress has won an Oscar for.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I was like, I don't...
Yeah.
Okay.
I have a few answers for this. My first instinct was to say something like The Heiress in place of Olivia de Havilland. I would have loved to see her play a little bit more of the darker side there. But if we're like just disregarding like time and space, like maybe she would have been a smidge too old for this by the 70s. But I would be interested in seeing Greer Garson as Nurse Ratched.
Oh.
How about that?
Oh, I like that.
Right?
I like that a lot. That's good.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Ooh. I would probably have a brilliant answer if I had had some time to think about it, but I didn't. So
Yeah, it's okay.
I'm just going to say I like that one and move on.
Perfect. All right. Andrew Carden said, rank the 4 Oscar-nominated portrayals of First Ladies. And that's Greer Garson as Eleanor Roosevelt, Joan Allen as Pat Nixon, Sally Field as Mary Todd Lincoln, and Natalie Portman as Jackie Kennedy.
Well, I'm putting Greer last. I know, shocker.
Yeah. Same for me.
As much as I like Lincoln and I like Sally Field, I think I have to put her third.
It's okay.
I think.
Yeah.
But I don't really like Jackie very much.
Yeah. Okay.
That's where I'm like,
yeah,
trying to.
I'm just gonna say that I haven't seen Nixon. Sorry.
Okay. It's good, and she's really good in it.
I've heard
and
she's
I would
great.
say that she's the best out of those 4.
Yeah.
I think my 2 and 3 are interchangeable. Sally Field and
Natalie Portman. Yeah.
Natalie Portman.
Yeah. I would say Natalie Portman would be number 1 for me, and then Sally Field, and then Greer Garson. And I love Joan Allen. I need to watch that performance. I'm sorry.
Eventually you will see it.
I will see it, yes. Okay, so some Deborah Kerr questions. Quick here, we got Cinema Sex Kitten, who said, while I am sure ageism played a massive role, do you think that Greer Garson and Deborah Kerr had acting styles that would have played well in the mid to late 60s if they were given a chance? I mean, they were both still working through the mid to late 60s, to be clear. I do think Deborah Kerr was maybe able to adapt to the times more, so yes, I would say to that question. Emily said, which redhead do you think had the better Oscar run since they both ended here between Kerr and Garson? I mean, definitely Deborah Kerr for me. That's,
agree.
Really, though, like, Mrs. Miniver is the only one of Greer Garson's 7 nominations that I would have even nominated. Sorry. I do think that Deborah Kerr had more interesting roles, like in The Innocents and Black Narcissus and Tea and Sympathy, that she wasn't nominated for. But the one she did get, pretty good on the whole.
Yeah.
Sammy Flowers said, the end of Queen Kerr's run, R.I.P. What other of her films that she was not nominated for do you guys think would have been a worthy nomination or win? I've already said them all. The Innocents, Black Narcissus, Tea and Sympathy.
Yeah, and especially The Innocents, for sure.
Yes, the very next year. Yeah.
Yep.
Jeffrey Kerr said, we've reached the end of Deborah Kerr's run at the Oscars. Which of her 6 nominations do you think she most deserved to have won? For me, it's The King and I.
I love that. I'm between that and From Here to Eternity.
I love her and From Here to Eternity.
I think I'm going with From Here to Eternity.
Love that. Yeah. Okay, so for some Shirley questions, Matt Stillman said, if Shirley won in 1960, could Deborah Winger have won for Terms of Endearment?
Maybe. I don't think Shirley is why Deborah didn't win, though.
Oh.
I don't know.
Point. Yeah.
Yeah. I think if Shirley, I don't know. I think Shirley probably still would have won for Terms of Endearment. I don't think that she won just because she was like overdue. I think it was also just like a really, really great performance. And if she hadn't won, I don't know. I don't know that it would have been Deborah Winger.
Yeah. I sort of think Shirley wins again, personally.
Yeah.
We will get to that race down the line where I will have
it
more
honestly to me
thoughts.
makes It honestly to me makes sense that Shirley MacLaine wins for that one, and I think she should have won more than once, but
yeah, agreed. She should be one that has multiple Oscars, I would say.
Yeah.
Maybe she'll have a great late in life Oscar run.
That would be amazing, and I would love it.
Yes. Leela said, so excited to hear you talk about The Apartment, one of my all-time favorite movies ever. Who would you cast in a contemporary remake in the Shirley MacLaine role?
I wouldn't, because I wouldn't remake that movie, but
yes.
I get your point. Oh, gosh.
I have a possible answer.
Okay.
If we're talking like more A-list sort of talent, like on that level, I thought of Saoirse Ronan.
Mm-hmm.
Just because I like her.
Yeah. Saoirse could do really well with it, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Man, I'm like blanking on every actress that's working right now.
All the youth. Yes.
All the youths. I just, yeah.
Another thought I had for this actually is Maya Hawke.
Oh, that's a good one.
Because she's like got a quirky, fun energy, but can also kind of break your heart.
Yeah, yeah, that's a really good one. And she's just such a fantastic actress,
She
too.
is, yeah. So, just a thought. But,
yeah, I like
but
that.
don't remake it, to be clear.
Don't.
Okay, and the other question there was, do you think Shirley should have won for this, or do you prefer her in terms of endearment?
I think she should be a double Oscar winner. Is what I'm gonna say.
So your answer is both.
Yes.
I prefer her in terms personally, but it's a close race.
If I had to choose one or the other, I would pick terms of endearment. But yeah, I personally would have voted for her twice. So
yeah. For some Melina questions, Dark Shaka said, can we take a moment to praise Mercouri for taking a stand against the Greek dictatorship and using her political career to promote culture and arts in her homeland? Absolutely.
Yes, we can.
Yes. She is a fascinating figure that I don't know if she gets talked about that much anymore, but she really, again, was someone who used her platform for advocacy and, really put her money where her mouth was. So
yeah,
people should read more about her. This is not a political podcast in that respect, so I can't get too far into exactly everything she did, but it's a fascinating life that she led. I'll just say that. Sue Ellen Rossi said, what are your thoughts on the evolution of foreign actresses in the race? In the 50s, we saw European actresses nominated for Hollywood films. Never on Sunday is a hybrid of English and Greek. Next up, Sophia Loren wins for an Italian film, but only after establishing herself in Hollywood. We kind of talked about this a little bit already, but I think it's great. I don't think putting a narrow view on what's worthy of rewarding is healthy in terms of like recognizing the value of film. It's the same reason why it's so frustrating for me that, and for a lot of people, that like horror performances and horror films aren't recognized as valuable by the Academy, or like comedies, just the fact that no documentary has ever been nominated for Best Picture. I think with non-American, non-English language performers, we are seeing this very gradual acceptance, dipping their toe in with Anna Magnani, and then this hybrid English-Greek film this year, and then just full-on international films in the years to come. It's showing that this can be more about than just like Hollywood stroking its own ego,
Right. Yeah. It's amazing how the place where dreams and imagination like come to life has such a lack of imagination and openness when it comes to who gets recognized and who doesn't. And it's good that we finally started to see more of an embrace in the 50s and into the 60s, but it definitely took too long and still wasn't as full of an embrace as it needed to be. The fact that there's so few Asian nominees across the board in all categories, and African nominees, and just from, it's very Eurocentric still. And it's just really sad that the one place where that shouldn't matter, where we should just really be trying to celebrate all the things that are great in cinema, still in so many ways feels really closed off.
Yeah, still like 60 years later, it feels that way. Yeah, it's very frustrating.
Yeah.
I wish that, and we can only hope that this newer Academy membership can make these very slow moving changes progress a little faster. Let's just say that.
Yeah.
Marcel said, who would you cast in a Melina Mercouri biopic? Probably an unknown for me. Or like an actual Greek actress. I don't have one top of mind right now.
Yeah. I think that there's too much of stunt casting when it comes to biopics.
Preach.
And if they were going to do this, which I think it would be an interesting story to put on screen, I'd love to see that happen. But yeah, surround her with people of names if you need names to get your movie made and get the financing. But give an up-and-comer a chance to shine. Like, give it to someone new.
Eric Maxwell Brunn said, if Taylor had won for Cat on a Hot Tin Roof, who do you think wins here? MacLaine, or does Carr finally get hers? Well, we're not going to say who we think was the runner-up quite yet.
Right.
So I'll say that. I will note that I don't think that Elizabeth Taylor wins again if she's already won for Cat on a Hot Tin Roof. But what do you think?
I agree. I agree. Yeah.
I feel like this creates like a very interesting alternate history because like I don't even know if she's even nominated for this. If she already won, I don't know.
Yeah, it's hard to say. It really is. I don't know.
Yeah.
But I definitely agree that if she had won already, she would not have won this one.
Yeah. All right, a few more questions before we wrap up here. Kyle Crocodile said, do you think Janet Leigh for Psycho should have been here rather than supporting? Who does she edge out if she is, or is she just not nominated? Is Janet Leigh a lead in Psycho? What do you think?
I think if we're doing lead based on star power, then yes, but no, she's not. She's not the lead of that movie.
She's the lead for a good 30-40 minutes.
But sure.
But that's not, yeah. I'm just saying, like, it ends very famously after that. So I would say she's supporting. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
So I don't even know if she's nominated if she is campaigned and lead.
Maybe.
If Anthony Perkins wasn't, I'm just saying.
Right. Yeah. I'm just looking at who was. I don't know.
Yeah.
I think that because of the fact that she's only in it for 40 minutes and then is dispatched never to be seen again, I think she wouldn't have if she were in lead.
Yeah. Cinema Sex Kitten said 1960 saw the election of JFK. Which of these women do you think would have best played a young Jackie Kennedy? Tough one. I guess Elizabeth Taylor. I
think Liz is the obvious choice there.
Yeah. Although I'm not sure if she could pull off the accent, but...
No. I would be very interested to see Mercouri's take on a young Jackie.
Wow. That is an interesting interpretation. Yeah, but weirdly it kind of works. Yeah.
It could be fun.
Yeah.
It could be really fun to see.
Totally.
But I think out of this lineup, Liz is the obvious choice.
Yeah. Miles McHale said, Elizabeth Taylor wins for a role where she is campy and fabulous, but even she hated. What other terrible Best Actress winning performances come to mind? For me, there aren't a lot of winning performances that I think are terrible, other than, sorry again to bring this up, but Louise Reiner in The Good Earth. And also a little bit Mary Pickford had a really tough time in Coquette, so I would say that's not great either. I think, generally speaking, some of the films that some actresses win with are not great, but that on the whole, mostly good to great performances have won this category.
Yeah. I think a lot of times, and I don't even think there have been that many where the movie is bad either that win, but I think when that has happened, it's because a performance has just really surpassed the film.
Yeah, right.
Honestly, I think Frances McDormand gets that a little bit in 3 Billboards.
Oh, yeah.
And a lot of people know my feelings on this. I would say Emma a little bit in La La Land, too. But I think that those films still have their merits, and that's why they're there. But I think that the performances in them are not bad at all.
Last 2 questions, or 3 people want us to talk about Gene Simmons in Elmer Gantry, who was famously not nominated, even though Burt Lancaster won Best Actor and Shirley Jones won Best Supporting Actress, her 2 castmates. So Emily said, would you have nominated Gene Simmons for her work in Elmer Gantry, and who would you replace her with if so?
I would have.
Yes.
And I would have replaced Greer Garson.
Yes, and yes. Nothing to add. And then Gabe Guarin said, why was Gene Simmons robbed of a nomination? And Amy Thomason also said, why do you think she wasn't nominated when both of her co-stars won? Do you think she was considered? Would you nominate her? Who would you replace? You know, we already said all that, but I'm curious if you think there's like a reason why she wasn't here. when the film did so well otherwise?
I think it just came down to votes. I really do. I don't think that this is why I hate when people just get so caught up in like snubs and things. I don't think she was snubbed. I think the votes just weren't in her favor.
So they weren't actively going out of their way to be like, we can't nominate Gene Simmons.
Exactly. In fact, I bet on the day when the nominations were announced, there were a lot of people that were surprised that she didn't make it in.
Yeah, absolutely. And I am still surprised personally, even though I wasn't there. I'm just, when you look back on it, it's very, very glaring, I would say, because I don't know, is it that the role is less showy than Burt Lancaster and Shirley Jones? I don't know, but for me, it's no less compelling. Like, there's something very haunting about that performance that Gene Simmons gives there that's very evocative, I think, and she's very committed to that role. So, yeah, I would definitely nominate her here. And let's just throw out this alternate history. Do we think if she's here in place of someone else, like if Liz Taylor, if that whole thing doesn't happen, does Gene Simmons even win? I don't know. Because, you know, maybe. Burt Lancaster won, Shirley Jones won, the film did very well. I don't know.
It's so rare for that many actors from a single movie to win, though.
This is true.
I don't know that she would have won, but I do think that having her in the lineup instead of Garson would have definitely could have potentially changed the outcome, would have definitely changed some of the tallying, I'm sure.
Something to think about. I highly recommend people watch Elmer Gantry for that performance in particular.
It's available for free on Tubi.
Oh, look at you with the plug. Very good. All right. Well, it's time for our final segment where we will reveal who we think was the runner-up of this Best Actress race. Karen Peterson, what is your verdict?
This is so hard for me. I think probably Shirley MacLaine.
Okay.
Probably. Only because, I mean, the movie was Best Picture. It, did really well overall. But I really go back and forth if it was MacLaine or if it was Carr. I think it's probably between those two. But I think overall, it's MacLaine.
Yes. The only one that I would count out is Melina Mercouri. I don't think she quite had the groundswell to win that. I think Greer Garson, for as much as we didn't care for that performance, certainly had a shot. She won the Golden Globe. She won National Board of Review. Like, she's playing a real person. There's a lot in her favor. But I actually do agree with you. I think it is between Shirley MacLaine and Deborah Kerr, and that it is not necessarily a runaway, obvious runner-up that Shirley MacLaine would have been the runner-up, as I'm sure I would guess maybe a casual person might think, like, oh, Shirley MacLaine obviously is the runner-up here. I do think that Deborah Kerr had some sentiment on her side, and the Sundowners also did very well. It was Best Picture nominated and got a bunch of nominations as well. So I think she was a strong third. I will agree with you, though, that Shirley MacLaine was the runner-up.
Yeah.
So last question for you, Karen. Who would you have voted for from this lineup?
Shirley MacLaine.
Same answer.
Absolutely.
Yes. See previous comments.
Yes.
Looks like this is going to be another episode where I completely agree on both questions with the guest. I also would have voted for Shirley MacLaine from this lineup, although knowing me, I might throw a sentiment vote behind Deborah Kerr. If I had a crystal ball and I knew that this was her last shot, I wouldn't have in 1960, but with hindsight, I would be very happy if she had won her Oscar for this, because it's a very good, kind of understated, subtler performance than we're used to in this category, but no less deserving. But for me, it's Shirley all the way.
That's the thing that's tricky, isn't it, though?
Yeah.
Like, because we want the best performance in the year to win, but we also want our favorite actresses to get their statuettes too.
Yeah. So you don't have to tell me twice.
Exactly. Yeah, it's always that hard thing of heart and mind. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, Karen, thank you so much for this fabulous season premiere. I think this was a really, really fun discussion. I always love chatting with you about, film and Oscars, and especially old Hollywood. So thank you.
Thank you so much. I always love getting to join you. I honestly do. I feel so honored to get to be part of the show ever, because you just what you do here is amazing, and the people that you've gotten on your show, I just to look at your lineup and then go, why am I here? It's
Oh,
very
come
humbling for
on.
me, and I appreciate it.
Don't be modest.
I'm being serious.
Well, it is.
I appreciate you.
It is. I appreciate you very much, or I wouldn't have you back so many times.
Well, thank you.
Yes. So I always appreciate you for, doing the homework and bringing the takes. And I know that, things are busy around this time of year. So I appreciate you for sitting down and watching these 5 movies from 1960 in the midst of the current Oscar season and whatnot. So yes, thank you again.
Thank you. It was absolutely a pleasure.
Yeah. And thank you all so much for listening. You can find me on Twitter at Kevin_Jacobson. Oh my God, I didn't even have you plug yet. Karen, where can people find you? Wow.
I am on basically every social network at Karen M. Peterson.
Thank you. Yes. Sorry about that.
That's okay.
Well, again, you can find me on Twitter at Kevin_Jacobson. The show's at Oscar Runner Up on Twitter, Instagram at And the Runner Up Is. Rate, review, and subscribe if you haven't already. And if you liked what you heard and want to hear more, go to patreon.com/andtherunnerup is, where you can hear a whole bunch of bonus episodes. And that's it for the season premiere. Next week, we'll be delving into the 1961 Best Actress lineup, where the nominees were Audrey Hepburn in Breakfast at Tiffany's, Piper Laurie in The Hustler, Sophia Loren in Two Women, Geraldine Page in Summer and Smoke, and Natalie Wood in Splendor in the Grass, with the winner being Sophia Loren. Really fun lineup. So that's what to watch before next week. Thanks again, Karen.
Thank you.
And with that, I will bid you all adieu.